Our affirmation today: I have the courage to face discouragement. I want to start today's message by reading the daily word. Many of you are familiar with unity, and unity is one of the new thought movements that our fellowship very closely aligns itself with. Today's daily word is create. I have the power to create a happy and successful life. So let me start by asking, has anybody in their life ever been a bit discouraged? At some point in our life, we've all been discouraged about one thing or another. And we know from reading in the scriptures, even Christ had times of discouragement. We read in the scriptures, he at times was crying in the garden. He was discouraged that his disciples weren't following his word. They didn't have the faith. They didn't have the belief in his teachings. So discouragement, don't feel bad that that happens to you, because if Christ was discouraged, then certainly that's something that any of us can fall into. And as I was reading and preparing for today's message, I was going through one of Pastor Mike's books. Some of you may remember this very early book that he wrote, In the Garden. One of the definitions that Pastor Mike used for discouragement is being discouraged, not having the courage yet to face the issue that has discouraged you. And I think I'm really grateful to Virginia because she pointed out a wonderful example. She had hoped to be in a private room. A lot of us, when we're recovering from an illness, we like to have our privacy to go through it. And she was a bit discouraged that she was going to have to share a room with somebody. But as it walked itself out, she found that it turned out to be a blessing because she made this wonderful, wonderful, great alliance, and that's something she's going to be able to take with her the rest of her life. So that discouragement actually turned into a good thing. Also this morning, as I frequently do on Sunday mornings, I was watching the television, and I think a lot of you are familiar with the Joel Osteen Ministries. I think his name has been mentioned a lot, and he uses a lot of new thought analogies in a lot of his talks. And one of them was about somebody who had been on a ship and was shipwrecked and was on a desert island all alone. And one day he had gone out to collect some food or something. And when he returned, on top of all his bad luck, he found that his little thatched little dwelling that he had made had caught on fire and was burning down. And he sort of, fell to the ground. He was so discouraged, saying, "Oh God, what more can you do to me?" And a short while later, he happened to notice in the distance a boat was coming towards him. And it came closer and closer, and it turned out it was a Coast Guard. And so he was rescued, and when he was on the ship, he, asked, and said, "Well, what made you guys come and get me?" And they said, "Well, we saw the smoke from this fire." So, of course, there is an excellent, example of discouragement resolving in your favor. But a lot of times we have to understand it's not going to. And a perfect example that Mike gives in his book, he spoke a lot about Vera, and she was a piano teacher and a voice teacher, and she loved music. She was a real big fan of music, and her and Mike were very close friends until she passed away. But in her later years, she began to lose her hearing, and of course, she was very, very discouraged about this. And so she started really, really aggressively going to a lot of different faiths for healing, because she was convinced that if she believed enough that her hearing issue was going to be resolved, that it would be overcome. And she strongly believed this. And he recounts how, after many years of going to different services and different healing lectures, she went one day and was very happy to hear the healing minister speaking about an elderly woman who had an issue with hearing, who was going to be healed. And so she was very excited, and as the talk went on, the person with the hearing problem was invited to come forward, and she stood up, but then, of course, another elderly woman stood up and came forward, and this other elderly woman, her hearing issue was resolved. And Mike recounts that at that point, Vera realized that she had to have the courage to accept this discouraging fact that her hearing wasn't going to come back. So she finally had to come to a place where she had to let go of this hope that this was going to be healed and embrace what she had been given and embrace the fact that this was the place where God wanted her to be. And so after a period of time, she did come to that place where she accepted it, and she found other things in life to replace that love of music. So we have these wonderful shining examples about how a discouraging issue can turn out to be a great thing. Accept it and embrace it, and realize that it has put us in a place where God wants us to be, because we know from our teaching that we are always exactly where we're supposed to be, even though it's not a place that we initially are very comfortable or happy about being. It just is where we are to be. So the question, as you're going through your daily activities this week, is, where do I turn in the face of discouragement? Do you turn to your faith? Do you turn to God and look for that support? Or do you, like our man on the island, just fall down and scream out, "Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?" So when you're faced with some sort of discouraging situation, where do you go? Where do you turn to resolve that, to get the inner strength to distance yourself and have the courage to deal with that? And of course, this being the Good News Church, I want to close by saying that regardless of what happens in our lives, the good news is that God's abundant grace is pouring upon us, bathing our discouragement in the hope of divine promise. So whatever discouraging circumstance or situation you find yourself in, know that there is that divine providence of God, that you are a perfect child of God, and that you are meant to live a life of perfect happiness, health, and prosperity. So when you think during this week, where do I turn in the face of discouragement? Know that God's divine presence is within us at that moment and at always. Even at your most discouraging moments, you aren't being abandoned by God. He hasn't set you adrift and forgotten about you. It just is a process of life that you're going through, but He is with you. His divine presence is with you and within you at all times.